So today for our seminar we have Dr. Mark Ferguson, who's working in the McMaster Institute for Transportation and Logistics. And today Dr. Ferguson is going to talk about Canadian consumer choices in terms of electric vehicles. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Ferguson.
Thank you very much, and thanks very much for coming to attend this event. So our topic is the evolution of the Canadian consumer attitudes on electric vehicles. The time period 2015 to 2018 basically reflects two surveys that we did at two different points in time as part of this overall project. Just briefly about our institute, the McMaster Institute for Transportation and Logistics. It was formed at the request of industry stakeholders in 2007. And since then, we've done numerous projects over the years, many hosted on our website, which is mitl.mcmaster.ca, so please have a look. Our largest project so far has taken place over the last 4 years or so, and it's called the Social Costs and Benefits of Electric Mobility in Canada. And that's the focus of today. Just wanted to mention our principal investigator who passed away 2 years ago in the middle of this project, Professor Pavlos Kanaroglu, who had quite good connections to many colleagues here at the University of Toronto. Certainly things have been a lot harder without him. We've got a new director at our institute now, Professor Saida Wazabi from Civil Engineering. One note about Pavlos, there's a new book that's out that's been dedicated in his memory. It's called The Practice of Spatial Analysis. And there's quite a few contributions from some of his colleagues in Greece. There's some from colleagues at the UT. Of course, there's quite a few from McMaster. So you might be interested to have a look at that. So just a quick outline of what we'll talk about. An intro and survey background. A little bit on perceived barriers to EV adoption. Perception about government cash incentives. Perceived urgency to adopt amongst those who haven't adopted yet. A little bit about EV owners and their wants and needs as far as public charging infrastructure is concerned. The next section, introduce you briefly to some of our geodemographic mapping. You're going to see a lot of maps and pictures in this presentation to give you, I guess, fairly vivid pictures of what's going on as far as the consumer landscape is concerned. Next section will be comparisons between 2018 and 2015 surveys in terms of what we were able to collect on attitudes. So there's some interesting results in how things have shifted in that time period. And then if we have time, which I'm not certain that we will, we'll talk a little bit about the choice experiment that was carried out as part of the first survey and some of the interesting results that came from that. So as part of our project, we're very much indebted to our partners. We've added a couple since the partnership got underway, but most of these partners have been with us from the start and have played an important role in helping us through the research and giving us their perspectives. So this overview of the modules refers to the overall project. You'll see a consumer module and a fleet module. The fleet module is being led by colleagues at the University of Windsor. We won't talk too much about that today. My colleague, Professor Mohammed, was here, I think, sometime in the last month, and he spoke about the public transit module. And basically, its focus was on electric buses. So he focused very much in the adoption context as far as public transit was concerned. The geographic or geodemographic module will be an important focus of what we're talking about today. And then the other module is environmental infrastructure, which has to do with charging station optimization. We have a little bit about charging stations in this presentation. There has been an economic impact analysis that was undertaken, and the final module had to do with integration. So shifting to the consumer piece, this is a chart of per annum sales of electric vehicles in Canada. This is not a cumulative chart, it's the sales each year. So as of the end of September, we were up to 35,000 electric vehicles that were acquired by consumers in Canada. Sort of a fairly even split between battery electric vehicles along the lines of Teslas, for example, and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles along the lines of the Chevy Bolt, for example. So the cumulative total to this point since about 2011 is just over 80,000 vehicles in Canada, and so even this year there's been about 35,000 of those that were sold. So this year things have really taken off. It could be that it will be an important year in the history of electric vehicles in Canada. So here's some empirical data, which I guess this type of thing, I haven't seen this in the past anywhere else. So it's basically a map of, in terms of total registrations or the total vehicle stock in each of these small census tracts. This gives you an idea of what percentage of those vehicles are electric vehicles. So you can see that so far the adoption pattern has been very much, I guess the relatively well-off core of Toronto, a little bit going, I guess, in the direction of the downtown area. And then you see some significant pockets up to the north, and I guess Oakville and Burlington is a fair amount as well. But there's large swaths of the area that are essentially very close to zero as far as market share of vehicle stock is concerned. Market share in terms of annual sales, and share of vehicle stock are sort of two different things. We're talking about the share of registered vehicles here. Here's a similar picture for Montreal. And there's a bit more of a stronger suburban pattern here. You still see, the unmistakable pattern in the core. Again, some of the better off areas. And here we have the same thing for Vancouver and Victoria. Victoria was included because it sort of has an interesting pattern that stands out from other medium-sized cities across Canada. So there's a fair amount of ownership of electric vehicles in Victoria. The Vancouver pattern is, I guess, sort of core-oriented as it was in Toronto and Montreal. Across all of these maps, the largest shares of the vehicle stock that you're going to see in any one area is about 2 or 3%. So as far as getting anywhere near a significant number in terms of market share, there's a long way to go before even a significant portion of Canada's vehicle stock is an electric powertrain. So we're still in early stages. Just a quick overview of the survey. So 2 national consumer surveys have been undertaken, I should say. They've both been pretty large, in the neighborhood of 20,000 observations. They were intended to be comprehensive and cover all parts of Canada quite well. There's about 3,000 participants who took part in both surveys. The comparisons that I'll be talking about today are focused on new respondents for both surveys. So comparing the new respondents from they were all new respondents in the first survey, and in the second survey we had approaching 17,000 that were new respondents. So we're comparing the 2 new respondents from both surveys in terms of what we'll show. A consumer survey panel has been very important for collecting this data, and I'm not sure how we would have done it without it. The firm that we used was Research Now, and their panels have been quite important. In the most recent survey, we emphasized a collection of data on EV owners, so people who identified themselves as actually owning an electric vehicle now. There weren't very many of those the first time we did the survey. There was a lot more this time around. So we collected EV owners via the survey panel, but we also, in order to top up the numbers, we also did it we surveyed EV owners associations across the country. So we got about 500 at the end, but have shed some further light. So in terms of the two surveys, this shows distribution of survey respondents by province. Not surprisingly, we've got more from Ontario and Quebec, as you would expect. Here it is in terms of age groups. We've emphasized a household conceptualization for the survey, so the idea is that a respondent would give answers for their household as a whole, as opposed to sort of just for themselves. So as far as household heads are concerned, for example, there's not very many household heads in Canada that are the age 18 to 24. We've got a good number from 25 to 34. So in terms of information that's been collected, a lot of things that you might expect. We tried to collect everything relevant that we could: income and education levels, labor force status, household size, dwelling type, dwelling tenure, information about parking infrastructure at the dwelling, where they actually park at the dwelling. I mean, just because you have a garage doesn't mean you park there, for example. Charging variables for EV owners, and then information about driving patterns. So there was, not sure how readable that is. There were some screening questions that we used to screen out people. The first question says, are you one of the decision makers in most or all important financial decisions made by your household? So basically, do you think of yourself as a household head? The second question is, how likely is your household to purchase or lease a new or used vehicle sometime in the future as an additional or replacement vehicle? So are you interested in acquiring a vehicle sometime in the future? For example, if you're an older person, the answer might well be no. And then finally, we asked about age group, as we wished for respondents 18 years of age or older. A significant component of the survey had to do with the collection of attitudinal information. So we asked questions in various ways that gave a sense of how people thought about things when it came to the environment, or the types of behaviors that were required of an electric vehicle, or many other factors. So I guess some of the first of the results, 2018 perceived barriers to adoption. The vast majority of the survey doesn't own an electric vehicle at this point, so basically we're asking them why not. We had a list of barriers, and we asked them to identify, well, how important is this barrier in explaining why you don't currently own an electric vehicle. Are you able to read those? I guess it's a little bit small. But I can tell you the top ones. Basically, where you see yellow and you see the lighter green color, those are considered the important barriers. So at the top, we've got a charging station may not be nearby, but I really need to charge. The second one is EVs just cost too much to buy. So a lot of people identify with that. The third one is public charging is much slower than filling my tank. So something about just the time involved in public charging. As far as what's at so 2 out of the top 3 essentially fears about the public charging experience. So there's a lot of people that are thinking that way, even though increasingly the vehicles that are coming out have very significant ranges. The Tesla Model 3 had a very large impact this year, and it has a very significant range. So those, assuming you're able to afford it, which of course links into question or statement 2, a lot of the anxiety related to public charging is starting to disappear for some. As far as what's at the bottom of the list, we have there was a lot of talk amongst our partners about it's difficult to purchase an electric vehicle, or the dealers don't make it easy for people. So we included a couple of questions that tried to assess that. So at the bottom, we have the purchase experience for an EV from initial inquiry to delivery is more difficult. And then another statement was, I find the dealers steer me away from EV. So basically those types of barriers came up at the bottom. So it suggests that most consumers are thinking about the broad issues of EVs when it comes to assessing why they haven't acquired one yet. As far as things like the dealer experience and so on, they just haven't quite got there yet. They haven't got to the point where they're thinking too much about dealerships and so forth. Of course, with Tesla, you don't need a dealership. So we've broken the barriers down in a few different ways. So a charging station may not be nearby, and I really need to charge. And this has been broken down by an urban-rural index that we devise, which basically measures at any location in space, at any dissemination area centroid in space, where am I on the urban-rural hierarchy. So at 9 to 10, I'm in the densest parts of Toronto. At 1 to 2, I'm quite remote, and then there's a lot of things in between. 5 is sort of a town, small city sort of result. So basically we can see here that, I guess not surprisingly, the further you get away from an urban core, the more concerned you are that the charging station is not going to be there. EVs just cost too much to buy. So this one we segmented by census metropolitan area, and I'm not sure of the exact reason, but Quebec and Montreal are appearing at the top of the list in terms of places that are perceiving that as a large barrier, whereas places like Toronto and Vancouver, I suppose it could be argued, are more affluent overall, are at the bottom as far as this is concerned. Public charging is much slower than filling my tank, and this again was sorted by CMA. And I don't know if the filling my tank part resonates with some of the people in Alberta who are our oil producing province, but for some reason we've got Calgary and Edmonton at the top of this list, which is kind of interesting. Public charging is much slower than filling my tank. This by urban-rural index, and basically the rural people are perceiving it as more of a barrier. The purchase experience for an EV, initial inquiry to delivery, is more difficult compared to conventional vehicles. So I guess one aspect here that's interesting in terms of it being broken down by age group is that the younger people are perceiving this as more of a problem than the older people. So that's kind of an interesting result. We asked some questions about, I guess, perceptions about government cash incentives, and of course the big news in Ontario now is we went from having the most generous cash incentive in the country to having no cash incentive at all. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out over the next few months. So basically, this was factual information. The province either has the incentive or they don't. But nevertheless we posed it as an agree-disagree type of statement, and it suggests that there's a good chunk of the population that doesn't have a great deal of awareness about the incentives. So for BC and Ontario and Quebec, which were the incentive provinces in the case of Ontario at the time that the survey was carried out. So we've got about 40% that are agreeing that they have an incentive, and there's large chunks of the population that are neutral or actually disagreeing. And then in some of the other provinces where there aren't incentives, like Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, there's quite a few that are neutral, and certainly there's a few that have got it wrong. So it was an interesting result. And then we changed the level of government to see if that made any difference. It actually just caused minor shifts in what you saw in the previous chart. So it suggests that there's a lot of people that, even if there is an incentive, they're not particularly sure, whether it's provincial or whether it's federal. There's a lot of people that certainly haven't dug into it very much, possibly because EVs aren't too much on their minds. We asked a question relating to the urgency to adopt an electric vehicle. So basically, how much urgency do you feel that are you feeling that your next household vehicle will be an electric vehicle or should be an electric vehicle? Plug-in electric vehicle to be precise. So here it's broken down by the density class, and there's a bit more urgency is being felt in the denser urban areas, not so much in the rural areas. And when it's broken down by age, we can see that the younger people are actually expressing a fair amount of urgency. It seems to be much more on their minds. If you look at the older populations, extreme urgency is just a sliver, so it's quite small, not feeling the same levels of urgency. Just have a quick sip here. So we asked quite a few questions of EV owners. So certainly a very interesting subsegment of all the consumers out there as far as electric vehicles are concerned, are those who actually made the decision to acquire one. So I guess one of the most interesting things is how do EV owners feel about existing public charging infrastructure, and how do they feel about what they would want? So basically, we asked them we put them through a ranking exercise where we presented these items, and we asked them to rank them from most important to least important in terms of what they wanted. So new level 2 240 volt charging where I park during the workday, workplace charging, or maybe at a GO station. Better public access to level 2 charging, better access to level 3 fast charging, additional charging ports at public charging sites, more places to plug in at a given site, cheaper to use public charging, actually acquiring a longer range electric vehicle so as I don't have to worry about public charging, or public charging is reduced, the need for it in my eyes. Desire for a more seamless charging experience, or improved local signage so as I can find the stations. So here you should look for the blue, I guess the lighter, there's a few blues there, the lighter blue and the orangey color. You can see at the top, this is ranked by the top 2 rankings, so either ranked first or ranked second. So what comes to the top of the list is more ports. So a lot of EV owners are tired of going to stations and finding there's nowhere to plug in, or that the station is occupied. So that comes to the top of the list. Second at the top of the list was I'd rather not deal with public charging, so for me it would be quite important to acquire an electric vehicle where the range is longer. So it's interesting that that improvement came so close to the list, to the top of the list, since it doesn't really have much to do with improving infrastructure. Public level 3, people seem to want fast charging. Installing fast charging is very expensive, but doesn't change the fact that people want it. Level 2 charging, desire for more level 2 charging came in next. At the bottom, we have level 2 charging at work and more seamless charging experience.
Sorry, did you have a sense as to how many EV owners actually need to charge during the day? Like how many of them, or are they just charging because they're scared or here?
I think our data suggested that something like 4 out of 5 charging events amongst the EV owners is taking place at home.
Okay.
So they're very much trying to
at the end of the day,
to reduce dependence on public charging if they can. So we asked them again about another set of improvements, but this time it wasn't so much the type of improvement as it was, where do you want the improvement? So where I live, there's some people who, where they live, they don't have access to public charging, so this certainly discourages EV ownership. In this case, of course, we're talking about EV owners, so we have to keep that in mind. Within easy walking distance of where I live, again, to maybe address the same problem of not having charging at home. Where I park during the workday, local coffee shops, grocery stores, and the like, shopping malls, movie theaters, and the like, regional shopping malls, leisure attractions, and the like. And then finally, sites further from home, where you're, in less familiar territory. So you're looking for stations near highway interchanges, or hotels, or conference venues, or those types of places. So this one, the most important stuff's at the bottom. So there's a very clear, I guess, spatial pattern where they seem to be saying that the more that the new charging infrastructure is farther from home, the more they like it. So they're feeling not too bad about their local circumstances. Obviously, there's exceptions to that, such as those people who just can't charge at home. But as far as this set of EV owners was concerned that we were able to survey, there seems to be much more emphasis on the regional sites and far from home. And Workday seems to do quite well in this question. So I'm sort of getting into the geodemographic parts of the analysis, and we've produced a lot of maps based on our first survey. We haven't had enough time or funding necessarily to do it for the second survey, so it's a pretty big job. But there's I'll show you quite a few maps in the next I guess 20 minutes or so before we finish. An annual kilometer driven is sort of an interesting place to start. I'll talk about how these were derived a little bit later. It's a shame that everything looks a bit green, but I've got nice red and blue here, sort of hot to cold. But if you look at the inset there, that's actually supposed to be a reddish sort of color. So it suggests, based on our survey results, much higher annual kilometers driven by people who live in those locations. And then you can compare it to the core in that inset, and you can see that the blues are standing out much more, some of the cooler colors. And if you look at the map of, the zoomed-in map of Toronto, you see that some of the core area is definitely lower mileage, and a bit more in places like Mississauga, some of the places close to the major highways. So this is, it's a relevant result as far as electric vehicles is concerned, because so much of it, remains having to do with about range and how far can I go on a charge. So some people simply, are going to put less demands on their batteries based on their daily driving routines. So here's the same stuff for Hamilton and Edmonton. So Edmonton, the results are very cool. So they just flat out don't appear to be doing as much driving as people in the greater Toronto Hamilton area, which perhaps isn't surprising. There's a lot more places to go. There's more long commutes here. There's probably a host of factors that would explain that. But again, it's a relevant result as far as electric vehicles are concerned. So in terms of how we did these, we basically went through a synthetic population exercise. So each of about 13.5 million Canadian households was basically matched with one nearby record from the survey in spatial terms and also in urban hierarchy terms. This was done so that constraints or targets that were associated with small census areas, dissemination areas, were maximally respected when the contained household information was added up. So the targets were related primarily to demographics and also vehicle registration totals that we had by the primary makes of vehicles, Mercedes, Ford trucks, etc. So individual survey records were used multiple times, even in the same small census area. So that's sort of associated with the fact that we've got 13.5 million households that we want to characterize, and we've got 20,000 records to do so. So basically, we facilitated mapping for all aspects of the survey, including EV attitudes and behavior, which I'll start getting into. We made the results of all this mapping were put into an online tool, which is I can actually send the link to anybody that's interested. So it's an Esri story map, and it allows you to scoot all over Canada and look at whatever areas you want in terms of the variables that we collected. So moving into some of the comparisons of attitudes. So perceptions about the environment and the role of social pressure, that's sort of the first theme. I'm very concerned about human behavior and its influence on climate change and the environment. This is shown by province. And the main thing here is that there's lots of the yellowy orange and the green. So people are basically united in being quite concerned about this topic, which is a different thing from going out and buying an electric vehicle. This is actually a red map, which looks sort of blackish there, but this is about as uniform as you get in terms of what you'll be seeing. So it suggests wide consensus that people are very concerned about this issue. People who are close to me think that it is important to consider the environment when I purchase a vehicle. So we're getting into some social dynamics. What are the people around me saying? What are they thinking about? And so in each bar here there's pairings of bars. We've got 2018 and we've got 2015. Hopefully you can see that. And I think what you can also see when you compare all the 2018s to the 2015s, you'll see some quite significant changes from 2015, some big shifts. So it seems that in the last 3 years, there seems to be more talk about electric vehicles in, I guess, in social groups, and it seems to be having an impact. So we were a bit taken off guard by just how large the shifts were in a 3-year period, but a very interesting result. Same question, and this is by age group. So at the top, for example, we've got people that are 65 plus, and even there's some significant shifts. We're not quite at the levels of some of the younger age groups. So this shifts to social pressure. I feel some social pressure to purchase an electric vehicle by age. So here, people are a bit more reticent to admit that they're feeling pressure. It's one thing to say my friends are talking about it. It's another thing to say I'm feeling pressure, apparently. So, of course, the younger people here in the younger age groups they seem to be feeling it a bit more. Whereas for the older age groups, there's, if anything, the results seem to suggest a decrease. It's probably not a significant difference, but definitely the pressure is more at the younger age of the age spectrum. So this is a map of social pressure to purchase an EV, and basically the results are cool, and in the outlying areas, in the smaller inset, it's even cooler, so they're feeling even less social pressure out there. So themes of personal conviction. I feel morally committed to buy an electric vehicle, and this is by Urban Rural Index, and I guess similar types of patterns. There's always these positive shifts as we go through the charts. There's generally always these positive shifts in favor of electric vehicles. I'm willing to spend more money to buy an EV, and here we've sorted it by CMA. So we've got Vancouver and Toronto at the top, and they've both experienced positive shifts in this regard, and I guess those are the most noteworthy results. I'm willing to spend more money to buy an electric vehicle, this time by the Urban Rural Index. And again, there's the strength of the urban areas that are standing out. And then by age group, again, the younger people are more willing. And this map is a little bit, I guess, slightly warmer than what we were seeing with respect to social pressure, or admitting to feeling social pressure. So there's a fair chunk of people that are on board with the idea of spending a bit more to acquire an electric vehicle. This is how it looks in Montreal. There's sort of a notable area in the core there, which is actually quite warm. So, moving on to aspects of electric vehicle knowledge. And we're sort of characterizing perceptions about driving range as being related to knowledge. So driving range would not concern me if I owned an electric vehicle. So the urbanized people are clearly less worried about that. Not too much in the way of discernible shifts from 2015 to 2018. So for some statements, like the one earlier about what the Friends are thinking, there was big shifts. For one like this, not so much, which is interesting because this is, this for the foreseeable future, this will remain an important, I guess, barrier to overcome as far as adoption is concerned. Driving range would not concern me if I owned an EV by age. The young people are a bit less concerned. And here's Toronto. Here's this. I picked out this one because Sherbrooke stands out a little bit. So apparently, some sort of a different attitude towards driving range in Sherbrooke, Quebec, and the eastern townships. I already know several locations where I could plug in if I had an EV. So how aware are you of existing EV infrastructure? I guess the main thing here is that Vancouver is at the top. Vancouver seems to be historically ahead in, I guess, public sponsorship of EV charging infrastructure. It seems to have given Vancouver an advantage as far as awareness about public charging. And there's some small shifts from 2015 to 2018. So I already know several locations I could plug in. So that's a truer statement for the higher density areas, and it's a truer statement for the younger people. So here's Toronto. Again, it's based on the first survey. I already know several locations where I could plug in if I had an EV. It's a very cool pattern. So at the time of the first survey in 2015, there was very little awareness of amongst general consumers of where were the charging stations. They didn't really know. In contrast, this is Vancouver, and it's a much warmer pattern. So it suggests much greater awareness amongst people that don't necessarily own EVs yet, but they know about the charging infrastructure. So that was an interesting result. A final one here: plugging in an EV at my home is not practical. Do they agree with that or not? So the results here suggest that this is, as you might expect, this is more of an issue in the dense urban areas. So the dense urban areas have generally more favorable attitudes towards electric vehicles, but at the same time, the dense urban areas have a lot more of the dwelling types where it's harder to plug in at home. So it's a bit of an issue. So plugging in an EV at my home is not practical, and I think that pattern of sort of the less cooperative dwelling infrastructure sort of is kind of reflected here. Some of the areas that have large numbers of spread out single family dwellings and so on, things look much better on this map from that perspective. So I guess quickly go over the choice experiment. This was from the first survey. So we presented people with 4 powertrain options: gasoline vehicle, hybrid electric vehicle, plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, and battery electric vehicle. And this was sort of the little educational slide that they reviewed as part of doing the survey, and it gave them a bit of a briefing about, what's the difference between an HEV and a PHEV. In terms of what scenario was presented to people, we let them decide what vehicle type they were interested in. Some people are interested in economy vehicles, some people are interested in pickup trucks. So we customized the scenarios to their preferred vehicle type. So this was the choice experiment. The one that we've done, there was a lot going on here. I guess we wanted to be comprehensive. We said it's a difficult choice to choose a vehicle. We want to present as much of the relevant information as we can. We know it's an issue for cognitive burden and choice experiments. And the one that we've done in 2018, we've made it a bit more economical and a bit sparser. But as it turned out, it seemed to work out all right. So we asked them about charging infrastructure variables. We asked them about government incentives. We asked them about operational characteristics like battery range versus how far you can go in a tank of gas. Certainly cost variables were very important. The role of incentives and so forth. So we developed a latent class choice model on the data. And basically each respondent was given 4 of those types of scenarios, which were adjusted for each scenario in accordance with an experimental design. And at the end of data collection and having built the model, we basically came up with 4 mindsets or segments that seemed to emerge from the latent class analysis. There was a proportion that were ICE-oriented, there was a proportion that was HEV-oriented, PHEV-oriented, and BEV-oriented. Now the ICE orientation was not in the majority, it was about 42% in the first survey. The BEV orientation was about 10%, so much larger than even existing market shares now. But it said something about the mindset of the people involved. And then pretty large PHEV and HEV orientations as well. And I'll sort of describe them further through a couple of charts and maps. So if you looked at the mindset by the urban-rural index, you'll be quite familiar with these types of charts by now. We can see that the green is the BEV, the yellow is the PHEV. So the top, sorted by the top 2. So that's the plug-in orientation, and we can see that the plug-in orientation is more prevalent based on the model in the denser urban areas. And the plug-in orientation is also more prominent in the younger age groups. And here's sort of a 4-in-1 map. Top left, we've got the ICE orientation, and it shows a core of Toronto that's pretty cool, actually, not so prominent. Whereas if you look at the outlying areas in that top left chart, it's quite hot. So quite large ICE orientation in the rural areas. HEV is probably the most spread out of all of them. It appears in the rural areas, it appears to some extent everywhere. The PHEV orientation in the lower left is basically an urban pattern based on the first survey, so it's not showing up very much in the outlying areas at all. But it's a dispersed urban pattern. On the other hand, the BEV orientation is certainly not showing up in the survey very much at all in the outlying areas. And it's not showing up too much in many areas of Toronto. It's more the core areas of Toronto, and a bit more to the east. Not so much in the well-established cores, which is it's something of a contradiction to the existing patterns or adoption patterns that we've seen from the early adopters. This is a little bit about willingness to pay. I'm not sure, so I have time to, I guess I should allow some time for questions. But basically this shows that consumers valued electric range and gasoline range in terms of what they were willing to pay for it, in terms of increased purchase price. They value things as you would expect. So the plug-in classes were willing to pay more for electric range than they were for gasoline range. And the HEV class, sort of hybrid oriented, was interesting because they were willing to pay quite a bit for gasoline range. In other words, you own a hybrid because you have some concern about the environment, and yet you're fairly comfortable with the notion of burning gasoline, which is essentially what you're doing. Just not as much of it. So how much extra would I pay for a vehicle to benefit from a $1,000 cash incentive on plug-in vehicles? So this might be a bit alarming for governments because it suggests that 3 of the classes sort of discount the incentive, whereas the BEV, well, the PHEV class is quite close to 1,000, so par value, as is the BEV class. But the ICE class and the HEV class sort of, as if they see the incentive as being, just beyond their grasp. And then, I won't talk about maintenance costs here, but this suggests that the BEV classes, I think they're focused on the mechanical simplicity of BEVs. They appreciate that, and they appreciate that they're saving a great deal on maintenance costs when they have basically a simpler vehicle with fewer moving parts. So just a quick overview of the conclusions from what we've talked about. I mean, electric vehicles are clearly gaining traction. We saw that in the some of the changes in social dynamics. We've seen it in the sort of the hockey stick that I showed in the one of the very first charts. Changes in the social dynamics linked between vehicle purchase price and the environment is being recognized more. Not much admission of social pressure yet. Bigger shifts are occurring in younger, more urban cohorts. But there's other shifts as well. I mean, the shifts are taking place everywhere. Younger cohorts express more urgency. The interest is sort of spreading out from metro areas and towards older age groups. Many of the key barriers that we looked at are perceived as bigger hurdles in outlying areas and in older segments, and in lagging, non-incentive regions such as Atlantic Canada. Didn't talk too much about Atlantic Canada, but there are patterns in some of the charts that I showed you. Supply side barriers, for example, dealers not being as cooperative as some buyers would like, it's not showing up as being too significant. As far as what owners want, they want larger, faster, multi-port charging facilities that aren't necessarily so close to home. And then finally, I think we're pretty safe in concluding that the majority of the population is at least open to the concept of electric vehicles, and we really weren't detecting too much hostility to the concept of electric vehicles. So I think things are looking promising as far as the future is concerned, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in the next 10 years. So thank you very much for your time.
Among the EV owners, I'm interested in knowing how many of them are just brand new car owners, so didn't have a car before and then bought their first car as an EV, and those who actually made the switch from an internal combustion engine to an EV, and whether you noticed in those who made the switch, whether there were any changes in travel behavior. Is this something you were capturing, that they use their gasoline vehicle differently than they use their EV right now?
Yeah. I think our EV owner sample seemed to, we were sort of taking what we could get there, so it wasn't, possibly not representative, but I think it was a bit skewed to the older people. I wouldn't mind looking a bit deeper into the data as far as that question is concerned. I'm not sure if I have the exact answer. I am thinking very much, I think, along the lines that you are of this issue of induced travel. Because if I had a Tesla, I think there's a good chance I would drive, 50% further or something. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's induced behavior. I think I have to look a little bit deeper to see if our data provides any evidence of whether it's actually there. I think it's coming though. It's going to be an issue that more and more people are going to be traveling more, and EVs don't necessarily have help with congestion, do they?
No.
Well, actually, in the line of this question, did you capture? I'm not sure I got that. Did you capture the number of vehicles per household? And do you have a sort of a representation of, for example, EV owners may have more vehicles per household than non-EV owners, or did you do not capture that?
We've for all survey respondents, we basically did a census or an inventory of the vehicles in the household up to 4. We stopped at 4 because there was a big group in the survey where you had to answer a bunch of questions about your vehicle. So I mean, the vast majority, 1 or 2 vehicles. I think some of our results have suggested that a battery electric vehicle, for example, is likely to be an incremental vehicle, which by definition means you've already got one. It can also mean that you've got 0 vehicles and you're going up incrementally to 1. So we broke that pattern down a bit, and we saw that regardless of the number of vehicles, and admittedly it was strong for 0 to 1, but it was also a fairly strong pattern for 1 to 2. So as far as especially BEVs were concerned, it was seen as riskier, especially in the 2015 survey, and I better have some other vehicles in my household as a safety valve. With PHEVs, much more seen as an all-around vehicle, so that it was less the case with PHEVs.
I think the point you made about PHEVs is interesting, that when people own them, but maybe they're not even very careful in terms of charging them, and they just wait until they get home. They don't care when it switches to gasoline, so at the end of the day, they might not be reaping the full benefits.
Yeah, there's a Chevy Volt site out there that shows how people use their car. I guess some people are absolutely religious about not. If possible, don't try to do a single kilometer that's fueled by gasoline, which makes me wonder why they have a PHEV in the first place. But some people just drive absolutely incredible distances without ever burning gasoline, and it seems almost to be a religious thing.
Okay.
Yeah. But probably a lot of people aren't like that.
Yeah.
I noticed your survey collects the tracking pattern. So I'm wondering what kind of tracking patterns and tracking outcomes or results rate.
I mean, to be honest, one of the simplest things to use was the estimates of annual kilometers driven. So that's probably my favorite thing. But we asked, how many trips are you doing on a typical weekday? How many trips are you doing on a typical weekend? How many long distance trips are you taking? And we use 200 kilometers within the context of a typical month. How many 200 kilometer plus trips are you taking? So basic things like that. So I could imagine a survey that was much more sophisticated in that type of thing. But we sort of did the best given, I guess, its context in the overall survey of that aspect.
EV ownership in urban area. So I can see that in urban area, people are more positive to purchasing an EV, but limited to the access to the charging station and the parking location, and also the more convenient access to public transit. Is that possible that it's kind of the urban residents may have much less EV ownership than they expected to have?
Well, I guess at the start I showed some pictures of where the EVs are owned now, and guess it, I mean, I suppose it was fairly highway oriented, not so much, a little bit in the downtown core, but more, a bit more suburban and highway oriented. I mean, as far as EV owners were concerned, I mean, we actually surveyed the EV owners, and we didn't get, let's put it this way, we didn't get very much data at all from any EV owners that couldn't charge at home. We did get a few, so, but not too many. So that's sort of an interesting aspect. I'm not sure if I answered your question. I tried.
I'm just wondering about your sample frame and sample mode and survey mode. I'm guessing from survey mode it would be like a management, like a web page kind of thing, or?
Yeah, we worked with a firm called Research Now, which operates a survey panel which has about I guess about 300,000 or 400,000 members across Canada. So it's quite a large survey panel. And basically, I mean, essentially you turn on the tap and the responses keep coming in. They come in quite quickly. Basically, we wanted responses that more or less mirror the Canadian population. So in terms of household heads, so we wanted appropriate representation by age group, appropriate representation by place in the urban hierarchy, owners and renters, and all sorts of demographic variables. I think the samples like I suppose some online samples, there's maybe a little bit of a skew towards people that are a bit more highly educated. And I noticed that there was a bit of we were having a bit more trouble with one-person households. I don't know if it's because one-person households are just too busy to participate in these survey panels, or what it is. But so there were some, I guess, divergences, but we lived with them.
Thank you very much.